Maganda umaga sa inyong lahat. Good morning, everyone. In today's video, we will be installing WordPress on our Mystic Debian LAMP server we created in earlier videos. Just to recap, the server is running on Debian 12 in a Proxmox container. We also set up two name-based virtual hosts. That is, they both have the same IP address but different names on that server. We will be installing WordPress in one of these virtual hosts. The other one could be used for a different web app. However, there is some pre-work we need to accomplish before that actually happens. In fact, the actual install will likely be anticlimactic, and you'll see what I mean when we get there. I should note that today's video assumes you have virtual hosts available, local or remote, doesn't matter, and that you have SSH access. So let's go ahead and get started on our content. As I previously stated in the prologue, I'm assuming you have a virtual host of some sort to install WordPress on. WordPress is a web app, and a web app is a program that is accessed on the network using HTTP or HTTPS via a browser. Sometimes web apps have their own client programs also. For the most part, they all tend to run inside a browser. Examples for personal web apps: WordPress, which we're going to do today, Nextcloud, Apache, MediaWiki. There's some commercial versions out there like Plex or, well, MediaWiki again. And any of the other ones you use in a web browser daily could be considered a web app, aka YouTube, Spotify, even Google Search. But we're focusing on the local web apps for our own personal use. So while we are running Proxmox containers, and that's a LXC container instead of VM from the earlier video, this does not need to be a container on Proxmox. You could install the web server we did in that video almost anywhere on anything. In fact, I have installed it once on a Raspberry Pi and it worked okay. You couldn't really overload it, but it worked. Should also note that there is no GUI. Everything we do here is via command line over an SSH session. And that's mainly because we want the server to focus on serving web pages and not running a GUI. Plus, we disconnected the keyboard, we disconnected the monitor, we disconnect the mouse, and all we connect up to it with is a SSH through a program like Putty over the network. There should be a card in the upper left, I think it is. Might be right. Anyways, that'll point to the older video. I don't think I mentioned it yet, but this is a local test server on a local private network, so I'm not going to be doing a lot with security in this video. In fact, I'm probably going to do pretty much nothing beyond passwords because, again, I'm the only one who has access to this. And I think, as I stated in one of the previous videos, my main point for doing this is so I can run some tests on some various web applications. I want to upgrade, do something with my web page at retiredtechie.com, and this is my first step by doing some experimenting to see what I like. As I said before, this is a virtual hosting, which means we have two actual hosts on this machine, or web server itself gets one IP address, and when the so this means that our web server will take input at its IP address, and then it will look in the header for the name of the virtual machine, and it will use this to determine which virtual host to send the packet to. Again, creating a virtual host was covered in the previous video. There should be a card appearing somewhere around here for that. Additionally, if you're doing this and you didn't follow the previous two videos, you could also use a web hosting service. There are lots of them out there, and you may be able to get a deal with a domain name thrown in for a few US dollars a week, at least for the first year anyways. Depending on what you are looking for, remember to check the long-term costs. These hosting platforms also offer all sorts of additional features that make life easier. For example, one-button WordPress install, or a cPanel to manage your database, or PHP My Admin. And like I say, if you get a web host, you'll want to make sure you also have shell access, SSH, and probably secure FTP too. In this video, since we are using the server we created in earlier videos, we are going to be doing everything manually. Okay, I'm going to apologize. I had to re-record all this stuff. For some reason, the audio didn't record first time around. But anyway, first thing we want to do is our pre-installation decisions. These are items that's really generally better to come up with before you start the installation. For example, we need a website name. I'm going to be using something very simple and unimaginative. Like I say, this is just a test site, and there'll probably be several of them. So WP Test 01 is what I'm calling my website. Then you're going to need to come up with a database name, a database user, and a database password. Again, these can be whatever you want. I'm using something simple and easy to keep track of. In fact, I'm going to be using the database username as the password because, like I say, private network. I'm the only one who has access, and I'm keeping it simple for now. Then you're going to want a WordPress admin user with his password or her password, their password. And a regular user, well, when you get around to testing, you're probably going to want a regular user and not an admin user. So you might want to come up with a name and password for that account too. And that should be all the pre-install decisions we need to make at this point. So next thing we want to do in the install process is go to the WordPress.org site and see what the requirements are. WordPress Hosting Team Handbook is what we're going to look for. Again, make sure you're on the WordPress site and not on a hosting site because the instructions on a hosting site will be specific to the host. We're going to look at server environment here. The first thing we're going to check is our web server. Let me make this a little bigger. Apache 2.4 is what we're going to be looking for when we check our container. And then there's several versions of PHP that can be used. If you read the notes, there's some issues with 8.3. Well, there's issues with all versions, but we're going to shoot for 8.2 for PHP. There's a lot of descriptive, including for older versions of WordPress here that you can look at. Not really germane to our situation, but interesting historical data. Next, we want to look at the extensions, and if we read carefully, there's only two that are absolutely required: the JSON and the MySQL. We need to make sure we have both those extensions installed. Incidentally, the MySQL ND is a program running within the MySQL or PHP MySQL extension, so we'll see that later. Then we got a list of a whole bunch of optional extensions. You can read through these and see what they do and decide if you need any of these. There's a couple I'm going to install, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Interestingly, with some of these, you don't need them. WordPress will run without them. It might not run as fast as it could with them, and there might be some options missing, but WordPress itself will run. Where these really become important is when we're talking about WordPress modules. A lot of these will be required for certain modules, and you're going to have to go to the module description to see which ones. That's actually beyond the scope of this video. We're just trying to get WordPress up and running, but I just thought I'd mention it. Finally, we get down to the MariaDB, and 10.11 is the version listed here, but these other versions will also work. Although they may not work in the next release. You can see as we go through get older, some of the older versions are not going to work anymore with the newest releases. Basically, the four things we need to check: modules, PHP version, Apache version, and Maria version, and MariaDB version. Now that we know the requirements, I want to open up an SSH connection with PuTTY to my server so I can look at what's there and if it meets these requirements. So let's go ahead and do a connection. Everything looks good. Font's a little bit small. I've noticed that on YouTube, these fonts, you need to make them big to be really visible. Let's go ahead and reestablish the connection, but increase the font size here. All right. And then we want to go over to window. Yeah, fonts. This is different than on Windows on Linux because the fonts are their own tab down there at the bottom of the Windows section. Let's go ahead and jump it up to 32 point. Okay, that should be big enough. Let's save that configuration for later. Yes, that's much better. Okay, let's log in. We'll clear the screen. Now let's start checking our versions. Apache 2 first with the -v option. You know, it says Apache 2 command not found. You're probably going to have to run this with sudo. And password for sudo. And we're running 2.4.57. Okay, that's good. Let's go ahead and check our PHP version. Again, -v. And we're running 8.2.7. That's good also. Next, let's take a quick look at the default installed modules that come with PHP, at least the Debian version. This will vary from distro to distro. We use the -m option. We can scroll through these and we can actually see that JSON and MySQL ones are already installed, so we're good there. There will be a couple of others we install just because I think they're necessary. Now our next one for the MariaDB is going to be slightly different than we'll use for actually accessing the database. We'll do sudo MariaDB and then we'll use V. You'll notice we use MySQL when we're actually accessing the database. You'll see that later. And our version is 15.1, so that's okay also. Looks like we're good here with the versions installed in the default Debian 12. Okay, one thing I'm going to need to do here, since I'm using the version from my last video, is do a little cleanup. I actually already did the cleanup, but I'm just going to show it here for those who are following along. So we're going to use the RM and the file name. There's two folders we need to clear out, our home folder and the variable /www/virtualhost folder. If you're removing a directory, you need to use the capital R as an option. Once you've done this, you can go ahead and, well, let's look in variable www/ and our virtual machine. Like I say, I cleaned these out already, but you can check both places with the ls command to make sure you've emptied out all the previous files. And if we look in the Electra folder, we can see the files that we created last time around are still there because I haven't cleaned that one out yet. And if we go ahead and look in the HTML folder, that's the actual default folder. If we went live, we'd probably delete, well, I don't know if we delete that or not. We'd change the contents though, because that's the fallback folder if no other virtual host is found. So let's go ahead and install a few things. Again, I've already done this because I've been playing around with it, but I want to install unzip, curl, and wget. I prefer to use wget over curl, but I'm pretty sure WordPress uses curl. They both allow you to get remote content. Unzip basically lets us unzip a file. And we've got one that's out of date. Oh, curl. Like I said, I previously installed these, but it's out of date, so we update it. As long as we're here, we might as well update the whole system so we're ready to go. So we'll do an apt update, and it's got to be sudo. And then we'll go ahead and do an apt upgrade. Oops, not root. Got to use sudo. I always have problems remembering sudo sometimes. But it lets me know, so that's okay. And our system's up to date, and we're ready to move on. Okay, our next job is to get the install file, and WordPress makes this pretty easy to do actually. Nothing in our home folder except for some config files. Okay, good. So to get the file, which is a zip file, that's why we need it unzip, we use wget and the https://wordpress.org latest.zip. Like I say, they make it very easy to do this. And this is going to download it directly to our server. And done. And there it is in the home folder. So now let's unzip it with unzip. Pretty straightforward here. Unzip and the zip file. So now we have our latest.zip. We have a WordPress folder. Let's take a quick look inside the folder, see what's there. And this is your basic WordPress website. We need to move these to our virtual host. As you can see, these are all owned. These are all owned by our user. They're going to need to be owned by www-data, which is the Apache 2 user. But when we move these, we're going to have to use sudo, so they'll be owned by root. So we're going to have to change that. So let's go ahead and do that. First, let's copy them over. We cd into the WordPress directory, and then sudo, and then copy star for everything, and then the target folder is variable www and we need to use sudo, yeah. Not copy, cp, backup. There we go. Star for everything in the folder. We're using a -r for regression, so it'll copy things in folders over. And then our virtual host file, our virtual host folder, and done. Now if we list our virtual host folder contents, there they are. So that's done. So we can go ahead and get rid of this WordPress folder in our home directory now that we moved it. So we'll use a -R with RM to delete it. The -R is for recursive. With some commands like RM, you got to use a capital R, whereas with like copy, it was a small r. Now if we look at our folder permissions, you can see that our virtual folder is root for user and group, and we need to change that. Again, it needs to be the www-data, which is the Apache 2 group. So this one uses a capital R for recursive also, and it's user www-data and group www-data, and then our folder name. And sudo. Bad hands. Remember sudo. Now if we do a list again, we can see that it now belongs to www-data. So we're good here. We've copied over the files for WordPress, and we made them belong to basically Apache 2. And you can see everything inside the folder also belongs to the www-data user. So this is a good thing. Ready to move on? All right, let's go ahead and look at some of our PHP extensions. Remember I said I was going to add a couple. We'll hit those right here. So sudo apt install. I remembered sudo this time. So PHP curl, which is used a lot. PHP XML. I may or may not need this one, but I'm pretty sure most modules will want it for WordPress. And finally, we're going to want to install PHP-zip. And this will also help with modules and themes as they generally come compressed, easier to download. Oh, MySQL. We also need PHP MySQL. I think zip was already installed. You can see I've already installed these three, so they're there. Let's go ahead and look. I want to make sure zip is already installed also. So let's see. Yeah, zip is there. JSON is there. We checked that earlier. Okay, everything's there that we need for this basic install. There's the SQL. Looks like we're good here. So it's time to move on again. Okay, now we're up to the most difficult part of this install, creation of the database. So remember I said we're going to use MySQL here, so we're going to go sudo MySQL tac U for user root and then tac P. We give the root password and we're in, and you'll see it says MariaDB down there, not MySQL. Again, no security on this. There are ways to add security, but since this is a local private network, let's do a show databases, and that's what's here right now. Show users is a little more tricky. We need to use an actual SQL statement, so we're going to do a select host comma user from the MySQL database and the table user within that database. And there's our current users. These databases and users are the default that show up when you install this. And like I said, there's a security protocol you can run in which will get rid of some of this stuff. If I was going to do a live server, I would run that, but since this is local, I'm not worried about it at the moment. So now we're going to run through a series of commands to create the database. I don't know why they use all caps in all examples for MySQL or MariaDB. It can be small letters, but we'll just follow what other people do. So all caps create database and the name of our database. And remember, in MariaDB as well as MySQL, all command lines need to end with a semicolon. So there's our real original database name. Forgot the semicolon. There we go. Now let's show databases again. And you can see the database we created is now in the table. Next step is going to be to make a user. So we use the command create user, again the all caps, which you don't need, but I'm doing it for convention here. And our real original username. And single quotes, you can use double quotes too. Then an @ sign, and then in quotes, local host. You need to have that, that's important. Then we need to be identified by, which is where we enter the password. And as I said earlier, I'm going to use the user name for the password to keep things simple. Again, if this was a live machine, I would use a real password. But as I say, I'm sort of keeping things simple right now while I'm doing my testing, because there's no harm in me totally deleting this thing and recreating it. Don't forget the semicolon. All right, now if we list the users again, our user should be present. So there we go. And our new user's there. The next thing we need to do is give this new user permission for the database we created. So we'll use grant all privileges on, and then our database name with a .star to cover every table in that database. And then we need to say who we're granting these privileges to, which is our user. Same format as before for entering the user. Something's wrong here. Caps lock. Yeah, caps lock. I still got to fix. Let me finish this line first, then we'll go back and fix it. Yeah, I left my caps lock on. It's easier than holding the shift key down when I'm typing the command names. Even though they could be lowercase, it wouldn't really matter. Okay, that looks good. Yeah, grant all privileges on, database, .star, user at localhost. Okay. And done. Next thing we need to do is flush privileges. Easier than doing a restart, although technically a restart would do the same thing. See, I'm using all small letters here and it's still going to work. And then we exit the database. And our database has now been created for our site. Okay, before we actually run the installer, I'm jumping over to my local DNS server, which is obviously a Pi-hole. It's installed with Unbound, so I don't want to keep typing the IP address. I need a way to find the virtual host, so that's what I've set up here. This will also work in the host file of the computer making the call, so if I entered it in my host file on my laptop, or whatever other computer I was using to access it, it would work. And if we go down to local DNS, we can look down here and we can see our server name and the IP address. Since this is our local DNS server, when I type this into the browser, it'll take me to that IP address. Since we're using host or name-based virtual hosting, the name will send it to the correct virtual host. Again, you could do this in your host file on your computer if you need to, and you're not running a DNS like I am. And we should be at the start of the WordPress actual install. First thing we do is set our language. For me, it's English. Then there's a little blurb here about creating a database. So yeah, we need to create the database. We already created it, but there's a little blurb about it, so just be glad we did it before we got to this point. Or we'd be sitting here with the browser open while we went back to the terminal to make the database. So we say OK, and then here's the form we need to fill out. And our database name, username, super secret user password, localhost is good, WP pre-extension is good. It says we're ready to go. Look at that. Sparky, huh? Okay, Sparky. So let's go ahead and log in. Make this a little bigger here. Now the first thing we do when we log in is we need to set up our administrative user, which is something we should have already created, so we know what the and our site name. So we know our site name, we know our administrative username or administrative user password, need an email address, and we're done. So let's try that login again. Will that continue? So next trick is to log in as the admin user. So that's what we'll do next. So let's go ahead and hit OK and head to the login page. And we'll enter our username for our admin user and his password. And we're there. We can take a few moments to browse around the interface here, but again, this is not the point of this video to learn to use WordPress. It's just to get it up and running. So you got entries for, well, this is what the site actually looks like when you get out of the interface, and this is due to the theme that's on there, and you can change a lot of this stuff. But we've got things for posts, for media, for pages, comments, and all that stuff down the left-hand side. You can close that top box, by the way. It's just a message. So yeah, it's up and running, and like I say, this post is not about learning how to use WordPress. We're just getting it up and running at this point. So we're going to close this video at this particular time, and maybe we'll come back to doing how to use WordPress at a later date. Okay, that's our video for the day. We finished up this series of 3 videos. I hope you check out the previous 2 for installing a Debian LAMP server, setting up virtual hosts, and then getting a web app like WordPress to run on it. They basically accomplished our objectives, and now it's time to start beginning and theming and loading modules and checking and looking for something that might just tickle my fancy and give me a direction to go with the retiredtechie.com website. I hope you found this helpful, and if you got any other web apps you want installed, let me know. I'll give it a try. I've done Nextcloud before. I've done Apache. I've even done MediaWiki. They're all pretty straightforward once you get to this point, and you can have as many virtual servers as you want. Of course, that depends on the resources assigned. Each server is going to take a little bit more resources away. And I really don't have anything else for this video. My next video, I'm actually going to be doing a Proxmox straight video. I'm going to be talking about creating templates and clones. So that's what's coming next. And I'm looking forward after that to doing a series on switching from Windows to Linux. And it's probably going to be somewhat different than what other people do, but hopefully you'll stay around for that too, okay? And as always, please like, subscribe, comment. And that's it for now.